Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the June 4th Transportation Commission meeting. This is the call to order. We'll start with a roll call by going through our commission members. Brendan Cruikshank. John Hanson.
Present.
Myself is present. Commissioner Kuhn.
Here, present.
Commissioner Stone.
Present.
Do we have Sergeant Kevin Rube? And Mr. Bauman.
I'm here.
Excellent. So at this point, we'll get into our preliminary general business. Public comment. At this time, any member of the public may address the commission on any subject within the commission's jurisdiction that is not on this meeting's agenda. The Arizona Open Meeting Law prohibits the commission from discussing or taking action on an item that is not listed on the prepared agenda. Commissioners may, however, respond to criticism made by those addressing the commission, ask staff to review a matter, or ask that a matter be placed on a future agenda. To address the commission on an item that is on the agenda, please wait for the chair to call for public comment at the time the item is heard. Do we have any public comment at this point in time? I don't see any. So we can move on to new business. First up is the land availability suitability study and code analysis project.
Hi, Tiffany Antal, zoning code manager for the city of Flagstaff. I work in community development. And today, you had us earlier in February, and we're back. We're back with a refreshed, better, more concise presentation. And we're really getting towards the end of hopefully growing some consensus of how we're moving this project forward. So we wanted to come back, regroup with you. There's also another component to this project, which we are working through with Mountain Line. So we have a small Mountain Line presentation added as well to this overall last cap presentation. And again, this is a shared project between community development, planning, our housing section, and our sustainability section. So we're just going to go over sort of the reason why we're doing this, and what our progress is, the overview of the code concepts, and our decision points. We're really looking at the decision points today, and we've tried to slimline this to maybe more of what your interest particularly is, and are more prepared to answer questions. So we already have a 10-year housing plan, and we have an adopted carbon neutrality plan. They each have very specific goals that we're trying to achieve. In terms of the housing plan, we're trying to impact at least 6,000 low to moderate income Flagstaff residents through a combination of unit creation and subsidy provision. So not only are we trying to increase our housing stock, but we're also trying to increase people using our incentives to create subsidized housing. Under carbon neutrality, we're trying to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. Good news is we're so close. I'm just kidding. Prepare. We're also trying to prepare Flagstaff's community systems and resources to be more resilient to climate change impacts, which of course is ever present in our existing infrastructure and our community as a whole. We've been adapting to those changes within the last couple of years pretty dramatically. And lastly, we want to make sure that anything we do is equitably distributed. So with all of that being said, this project was really twofold. It started out with the land availability and site suitability study. Really what that was an opportunity for us to look at our overall land supply left in the city. what potential greenfield sites were there, what potential infill sites were there, and what maybe were the barriers to providing housing on those sites. That study is for the most part complete, but it really helped set the framework of us starting to understand what those barriers are and how our codes could really adapt. And that comes into that code analysis project. The first step in that was going through this diagnostic of trying to understand what are those barriers. And we took a broad, big approach. We looked at the zoning code, our subdivision standards, our engineering standards, and a little bit of our building code, and so on and so forth. Right now, we've basically, as you can imagine, there was a long list of potential barriers. We tried to narrow that down, and we've come back really focused in on mostly the zoning code, but there are a couple of items that fall outside or directly relate to just overall how we deliver development projects. So that's where we are as this code concepts project. And this is where we're trying to get this high level feedback. Where are the places we can go to really move the needle in terms of our housing and climate goals? We can go big, we can go small, we can do in between. And so, really, what we're trying to gain is what's the comfort level? Because every time we change the code, there are pros and cons affiliated with all of those. And so, we're trying to be really transparent and get people to understand that, we may be very for reducing or getting rid of parking minimums, for example, but what's the potential impact that the community might face, and how might we also address that or deal with it? Our goal from here is to get all of those sort of directions back to our consultants so we can come up with full final code recommendations and be drafting and have new code implemented next year. So just high level, what those code barriers were, it has to do with what are density allowances, so how many residential units we allow per acre in our various zoning districts. That's both residential and commercial. How we park residential projects, and some other sort of standards like high occupancy housing or resource protection. They're extra layers of development standards that we apply to certain projects. And lastly, our incentives. What I will tell you is density and parking are really the two things we know we can tweak in our code and to make real progress in one direction or another. In terms of the incentives, we haven't given enough to really sweeten the pot to make those incentives worth it. So those are some of the big outcomes. Other barriers include all of our processes. I don't know that I've ever worked with a developer that was like, thank you, that was the easiest and best process I ever went through. I'm waiting to find the planner in a public setting that has had that experience, and then maybe we'll mimic their process. But we know that our process is cumbersome. We're always looking to improve those. Other potential barriers include, or some of these ones that are included in here is because they are related to other potential issues. Street width and design, it can be directly related to density. It can also directly be related to that parking requirement component. Same with our winter parking ordinance. Street connectivity is an issue. The fact that we currently don't use transportation impact fees, as well as the need to maybe implement some transportation demand management, including those policies and procedures in how we manage our impact analyses. So the code concepts report is really divided. This is you, friend. I'm gonna hand the slide over to Jenny. I just get excited.
I mean,
She's gonna take over.
poorly. Hi, folks. Jenny Neiman. I'm the Climate Action Section Director. I am part of this project, and we'll talk a little bit about this code concept report. As Tiffany mentioned, this really follows from the barriers that we found in the code diagnostic to talk about what can we do, right? What could this look like if we want to think through these different code concepts, these different number of questions, and we'll get to those questions, as well as different scenarios that might help us meet our goals while addressing those barriers to density, barriers to climate, et cetera. The purpose of all of these different concepts and these different sort of scenarios is to help us get to really weighing out the balance of these things, right? Thinking about parking, thinking about how we plow our streets, thinking about density. How do these things all work together to get us to where we ultimately want to go? We have a number of questions, we have a number of scenarios. The point is really to start those conversations. Getting into the code concepts, the first is a menu of sustainability options as well as transportation demand management standards. We often refer to this as TDM. The goal of this menu is to really kind of introduce a points-based approach to give developers flexibility to sort of say, hey, here's a menu of options. We need you to meet X number to be able to move forward. To allow flexibility, we know that certain sustainability standards work with certain types of development, certain sustainability standards work on different kinds of lots, right? And so we want to give that flexibility to developers while also meeting our goals, while at the same time not running into something where we are putting housing and sustainability in competition with each other, right? We want to move all of these things together at the same time. In terms of TDM, right now, as Tiffany mentioned, we don't have impact fees for transportation, but we also don't necessarily have a large option for how we can reduce demand, which is essentially driving, right? We make assumptions about how many cars will drive to this apartment building, for example, right? Well, are there elements that a developer can do to actually replace that driving? The good news is that we already have elements of our code that do this. Developers can reduce parking in certain ways if they locate around transit, things like that. So it would sort of be an expansion of that concept that's already in the code. In terms of resource protection overlay, we did talk about this when we were here last time, but this is really moving from our current standard, which isn't necessarily good for density, isn't necessarily good for preserving our most important resources, and isn't necessarily good for home hardening and fire protection, right? And so looking at that and saying, how can we do this better? How can we move from this really broad zone to, can we actually look at the very specific resources on a property? Tiffany has been working really hard with the folks in the fire department, and we actually have a pilot going forward right now that would explore different ways to do this. We'll learn from that pilot. We're also learning from all these conversations, and we'll move forward with a code concept that kind of helps us balance all of those things in a little bit better way than we do right now. Reduce street widths. So again, this is just a concept, but the conversation is, can we have narrower street designs that better serve our community? The diagnostic report found that, I think it's a reduction in 5 or 7 feet in our street designs can lead to a much larger amount of land for development, right? Can really lead to better returns for that developer if we are requiring more narrow streets as opposed to wide streets. So how does it reduce costs? But the other benefit of that, and I know the Transportation Commission talks about this a lot, is how do narrow streets calm traffic speeds, right? How can they actually be better for safety in some way? And how can they sort of balance all of these things? Winter parking ordinance and snow removal. So this is really about how do we manage snow in Flagstaff? We talked about this before, but the diagnostic report showed that Flagstaff is an outlier in terms of our winter parking restrictions. They are basically the most stringent that they found in the country. And so as we think about our snow season, and we've been talking with our streets team, as we have better information about when storms are coming, which we do, we have really good prediction now. How can we think about how we might change our winter parking ordinance and snow removal and how those two things work together? Right now, because of our winter parking ordinance, folks can't rely on street parking. And so what that means is we have these streets that maybe have street parking on both sides of the street. And so we have this really big cross section, and you can't park in it overnight or, long term for almost half the year. And so it's not the best use of space in a place where we have incredibly limited space and incredibly high needs for all of our spaces. And so there are a couple different elements here. There's specific streets that might be designated for snow removal during emergencies that you can't park on. There's alternative side or even odd parking limitations, or there's prohibiting on-street parking during a snow emergency event. So there's a lot of different ways that other cities deal with this. We have looked at snowy cities across the US, right? A lot of cities just let people park for the winter and their car gets plowed in and people dig it out, right? There's a lot of different ways to do this. Flagstaff is certainly an outlier. And so the point of this code concept is to just really look at what are those different trade-offs with each of those different alternative scenarios. And I think I'm going back to Tiffany.
Through this pretty quickly. So the rest of the core standards and incentives are really all of the little pieces of the zoning code. It's how we do those density units per acre, it's the number of parking spaces we require and so forth. But really where our consultant took this was to look at, should we really just focus on optimizing our existing incentives? Should we look at really just going towards market rate and making things by right in the code? Or should we look at how we can offset one thing for another? And that really is the scenario too, where we can achieve a lot of different things all at once. So they looked at the different ways in which we can move components of the code to basically achieve different sets of outcomes. The little tweaks that they looked at again were density, our density bonuses, floor area ratio, parking standards, and parking standard incentives, as well as our sustainability standards. Today we wanted to not spend so much time on density with you all. If you're curious or interested and want to have more conversation, we'll come back and do this with you, but we wanted to talk just briefly about what parking standards could look like. This table looks like it says a lot of things, but it's kind of a gobbledygook table. So let me just take a minute to pull up a document to show you what this looks like. I just wanted to give you examples. Last time I struggled to come up with an example, so today I have them. By right, or under our existing zoning code right now, if you did a 20-unit apartment complex, everything is 2 and 3 bedroom. Okay, this is just simplification. You'd be providing about 45 parking spaces for that regular 20-unit apartment complex. If you were to use our affordable housing incentive, we could reduce that by 10 parking spaces to 35. So looking at our code concepts in terms of what we could do to enhance the incentives, 20 unit under maybe just an affordable housing incentive, you could go down to 15. So starting from 45 all the way back down to 15. Under sustainability, we're looking at 20. And that's just using the incentive. So at the end, we're getting something out of that. So for housing, we're getting affordable housing units. For sustainability, we're getting development that's getting closer to achieving our carbon neutrality goals. And lastly, what we've talked about is just by right, not focusing so hard on the incentives, but what we could do by right. And the proposal under that you could see ultimately would get us to 30 spaces. So there's a broad range. What's good to know about this is that our incentives could still work to our advantage, even if we made reductions by right across the board. We definitely know that parking is one of the most expensive parts of delivering essentially a housing project, especially if it has to come in the form of a parking garage. So wanted to throw that out there. I'm going to jump back to the presentation now and just show you really quickly what that could look like. It's the difference between an incentive versus the by right allowances. And then I feel like, no. So the good thing about all of this, do you want to grab this slide about greenhouse gas emissions? I mean, the good goal of trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, the reductions by scenario is that our scenario 2, which was really trying to focus on by rate changes, incentives, but also requiring sustainability features, it probably does the best in terms of getting us towards our greenhouse gas emission goals. Scenario 1 and 3, where 1 we just focus on incentives or 1 we just allow by right, does less for that overall goal of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So we are really out and about shopping questions on our a couple of decision points. And so one of the ones we would love for you to think about, and if you have thoughts or feelings to get back to us on, and we don't expect it today, but when we look at increasing density, should we be going broad brush across every zone, increasing density, or should there be areas where maybe we're focusing for density? For example, um, a lot of cities are moving towards putting a lot of residential development in commercial zones and really achieving high density projects in those zones. Those areas also tend to be more along collector and arterial corridors, that zoning category does. And then by that, it also tends to be better served by transit and alternative modes. So we can look at sort of that type of increase of density. Otherwise, do we want to grow or increase our densities in other sort of suburban or residential single family neighborhoods? You know, right now we have density caps in most of our in single family residential that go from minimum of 2 to maximum of 6 units an acre. So we have large areas where we're not getting over 6 units, and we know 6 units doesn't really hit the need for making transit work. You know, we really want to probably get upwards of 8 to 10 units an acre to really start to see a functional density level that supports a good transit system. So there's ways that we can be strategic about increasing density that keeps all of the things that we're looking for, increases our housing stock, but can also target it in the areas that it can best be served in. Also, we're looking at those parking reductions and seeing how comfortable people are. I mean, the feedback we've gotten is across the board. We have people who are pushing us to today get rid of all parking minimums. And there is a growing conversation across the nation, and there are cities upon cities who are removing their parking minimums overall. And so, is that the direction we want to go? Do we want to take a slower approach? Are we even open to parking reductions as a whole? And if we do those parking reduction, is it important to look at other alternatives, or do we just go to trying to push as many people out of their cars as possible? The less convenient using a car is, the more likely people may make an alternative decision. Additionally, I mean, with the cost of housing these days, which I'm sure we've all experienced, people may be making those choices between car and home. And how do we help make that decision? So why, if somebody is choosing home over car, should they still be paying for a parking space? Because we know that that can dramatically increase the cost of rents. Do we support creating a menu of sustainability design standards for developers, especially if we build in that flexibility to allow them to choose from? And if we do that, do we think that transportation demand strategies are as just as important to that particular conversation? TDM can have just as good of an impact on dealing with the reduction of parking on development sites as much as trying to provide parking elsewhere. So this is one of those things we're hoping to see incorporated in the code to sort of alleviate any other standards. So we're trying to take that broad brush approach. Reduce street widths. These code concepts propose new options for narrower street designs that would allow maybe potentially higher development for some development types. When you look across Flagstaff, we have this wide variety of street standards. We haven't varied and gone as small as streets in Presidio or in a lot of our townhouse developments. When with the street width standards that we have now, it's much harder to achieve the densities that we were once able to achieve, especially in townhouse developments. So some of the feedback we get is there's not starter homes in our community. We're not getting the smaller starter homes, and how do we get there? So it's harder to create. We can create smaller lots all day long, but sometimes when you have smaller lots with wider right of way sections, we're not necessarily hitting those density marks. So part of the conversation is reduced street widths. Of course, our street width standards are heavily influenced by our fire code and and the provision of services from our fire department. So their feedback in this is also very important. But should this be one of the things that we look at? Do we support developing a strategy and outlining that process for creating narrower streets? So, what it looks like, we'd come back and formulate that and go through the public process. We don't know what it looks like, but we're just trying to find what are those high level stops for the community. And then, do we support developing a strategy and outlining a process for replacing the current winter parking ordinance? Um, Even though we are an outlier, we are an outlier in a way in which we provide a very high level of service currently. And there's always an expectation from the community that we even go higher. So offsetting winter parking ordinances could result in a different level of service, and we would need to be able to manage public expectations. So we're trying to garner where are the comfortable points where we can move the code and still feel comfortable as a community that we're getting the services we need. And so wanted to just tell you what our next steps are in this process before I hand this over to Busy and she can talk about the transit component. We are trying to wrap up our outreach. We have a community conversation happening, which is a larger conversation with our council and commission members and members of the public and developers to understand where are these comfortable points for everyone. We're asking for comments and feedback as much as possible. If this is something you're passionate about, you have concern, if something is a no-go, we want to know. And then, of course, we'll get on those final code recommendations and we'll start changing code. With that, I want to hand it over to Busy because she has some of the best parts of this. Okay.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thank you. Busy Collins, Strategic Performance Planner for Mountain Line Public Transit. I'm really grateful to the city, first and foremost, to be included. Mountain Line is very grateful to be included in part in this last cap opportunity. Throughout this presentation, I really heard transit woven into all of the solutions that Tiffany and Jenny brought up. And I think that is just so exciting because transit isn't a standalone item. It's really a tool for the city to be using to achieve these housing and sustainability goals. And today I'll really outline the very specifics that maybe you'll hear echoed back to Tiffany and Jenny's presentation. If you would like the full report on the transit-related codes assessment, I'd be happy to send it to you. So please email me after this presentation. So it's all of the transit-related codes assessment recommendations are divided into 3 topics so that I just have 3 slides here. And I'll let you read the recommendations. I'm just going to share some backgrounds on why it's listed and why it's important to Mountain Line. So overall, Mountain Line's priority is frequent service along the main corridors in Flagstaff. And as most transit trips begin and end on foot or bike, we rely on pedestrian and bicycle connectivity to access bus stops on main corridors. So therefore, in this slide, we're really asking for not to make people walk through long and dangerous parking lots, really have that building towards the street instead of reversed, avoiding those cul-de-sacs, circuitous neighborhood road networks that increase the distance to access transit. Having corridor-based density where transit operates today makes transit the easy choice for Flagstaff citizens. I definitely heard that in Tiffany's presentation on density. Let's focus on where transit is and have those be hand in hand. Also, affordability, higher density housing and access to transit both contribute to that affordability for households in Flagstaff. Again, what Tiffany has already pointed out. And the last 2 bullets here, the sooner transit can be included in the development conversation, the more impact we can have towards achieving Flagstaff housing and sustainability goals. So just getting us into that conversation early. And then integrating transit with code means more predictability for developers on transit expectations and costs. We don't want to negotiate from the dais. We really want it to be transparent in the process that the city runs regularly. There we go. Next topic here, we're really trying to get it right from the start. So transit is again the easy choice for citizens to make. The TIA process, so the transportation impact analysis, really having transit considered in that process. So then the impacts that are assessed includes transit. That maybe it's not as much car-oriented improvements, adding a lane, et cetera, because transit is already available to that development. And so analyzing that, so maybe fees will be less for developments and we can rely on transit as part of the solution, building that in. Incentivizing past programs with HOAs, employers, et cetera, through the development process puts free bus passes into more hands. Again, just making transit the easy choice. And then Mountain Line is always open to partnerships for private funding of transit operations that are not identified on our 5-year transit plan. For example, Mountain Express that we provide up to Snowball every year. That is a private private partnership. Snowball funds at 100%. That's just a great example of somebody wants transit service somewhere. Let's partner. Let's come to the table and talk. How do we do that? And this is my last slide. Electric mobility. Mountain Line is on our zero emission transition, and we will need on-route charging and are seeking a clear process to permit that for us. So that's all I have, and I think we're going to accept some questions if you have them. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I think we'll start with questions from members of the public. Is there anybody in the public that would like to speak? And okay, and Councilmember Spence, I see you gave me this card. You're welcome to discuss with the commission as we have conversations. So I think this is going to be our only call to the public.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is David Spence. I'm a newly elected city council member and I'm the council liaison to the Transportation Commission. So I'm pleased to be the conduit for information and questions between this commission and the city council. I have an idea that I would like to float. So my coming to the microphone today is a trial balloon. And it certainly relates to everything that has just been presented on how parking availability inversely relates to vehicle miles traveled, or the more scarce the parking is, the fewer people will have vehicles and will rely more on public transportation, bicycling and walking, especially if their home is close to where they shop and work. We've heard discussion about reducing parking minimums as a strategy to meet climate goals, and how Flagstaff might join other communities that have in their development codes just done away with parking minimums. That forces parking out onto the street, and that is the topic of my trial balloon. We're also talking about winter parking restrictions. Currently, during the winter months, there's no parking on any streets anywhere from November through March, whatever those dates are. So here's my trial balloon. And the reason I'm mentioning this is so that people can give me feedback on whether this is idiotic or totally unfeasible, or whether it merits further development. And my ordinance, my trial balloon is that we enact an ordinance that says throughout the year and throughout the city of Flagstaff, everywhere in the city limits, you park, if you want to park on the street, you park on the
Thank you, Councilmember Spence. We can discuss that, but I think first let's, so if there's no other further public comment, I would propose that, oh, we have one online.
Sorry,
Okay.
can I speak? Yes, I apologize. Good afternoon, Commission. I'm Sam Meyer. I'm here representing the Bicycle Advisory Committee. I can't speak on behalf of the committee since we haven't reviewed the last cap project as a group yet, but I would like to underscore some of the discussion points that were made just now. Namely, Busy mentioned that parking lots, large parking lots in front of buildings, are hazardous to pedestrians and bicyclists. And I really want to emphasize that point. Parking lots are a site of a lot of conflict between bicyclists and drivers. Even though typically people are traveling at low speeds, it's been my experience as a cyclist that they're also not watching for anything other than another vehicle. And so anything we can do to make parking structures both smaller and safer for pedestrians and cyclists, I see as a priority. I'd also like to briefly comment on narrower streets. The research indicates that narrower streets act as a traffic calming measure, meaning that people drive more slowly, and that makes streets safer for cyclists and pedestrians, particularly if the street isn't wide enough for vehicles to be driving in opposite directions side by side. That's actually a strategy that we use for bicycling routes in the city in residential areas, is that cyclists can take the whole lane and be more assured of their safety because vehicles are going slower in the event that they meet an oncoming vehicle. I hope it made sense the way that I said that, but I want to emphasize that narrower streets are really, really important for cyclists and pedestrians and to help the city meet its Vision Zero goals. I think also this wasn't discussed, but that the last cap plan includes some discussion of including bicycle parking in development standards. And I want to emphasize that is also being important to encourage other forms of transit. And I would add to it parking for micromobility devices like scooters, e-scooters, things like that, which have somewhat distinct needs, especially if they need to be charged outside of residential areas. So I think that's all I have, but I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Sam Meyer. Any other public comment? And I don't personally have the Teams up in front of me. So if people on Teams have comments, feel free to just go ahead and speak as necessary. Okay, well, with that, then I would propose that we as a commission can step through the questions they had and discuss them amongst ourselves. Does that sound good to other commission members?
Sounds good.
Excellent. And to clarify, thank you all so much for your presentations. Are you looking for, are you looking for something formal out of us, like a motion, or are you just looking for our feedback and comments? So that would suffice.
We're just looking for feedback and comment. And if you're not comfortable in the setting or you're still absorbing, because I'm still thinking about all of this stuff every day, please feel free to reach out to us. If you reach out through Jeff, he can send that communication directly to us. The more, of course, we have your comments and feedback, even documented in writing, the best we can serve you. But we're here to answer any questions that you have or take any feedback you want to give us now.
Thanks. I have one quick question. The presentation I have only it starts at question 2 and skips question 3. Is that intentional or?
Yeah, question 3 was about floor area ratios, which we felt was, it was a little bit less focused on transportation. It is about intensity of land use, but we were trying to simplify today's presentation. I can send you a copy of all of our decision points as well. The staff summary that was provided does include all of the decision points.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that I wasn't missing anything. Great. Well, the first question posed to us, which is listed as question 2, is around density. Where and how shall we increase density? Are there any thoughts from commission members?
I've been doing this for a while. It's Bob Kuhn. I've been on the commission for a while. Are we going to start pushing? I live off of Elk Run, and you've heard me talk about it. There's no sidewalks on Elk Run. We're not encouraging walking or bicycle. I ride and bicycle all the time and walk all the time. Why aren't we pushing for a development in that vacant land by the in a store there? So we bring the communities. Let's bring the communities back to the housing, and that will help. We talk about small streets, but we've got to do something to help people that are already living in areas like we are, availability to walk and do stuff closer. Is that part of the plan?
So it's not something that's included in this. It's an excellent comment. It's not one of the code concepts directly, which is about what I hear you saying is, expanding the allowed commercial or other things that draw people to a particular location. So where you are, it's quite a trip to a grocery store, for example. And so having those facilities, we do definitely have goals and policies that lead us to trying to get to more mixed use neighborhoods and the like. But there's a lot of work we need to do in terms of the zoning code to make that a possibility. What I would tell you is I think a lot of that a conversation is coming with goals and policies coming from our regional plan. And with that, when we get those new goals and policies, that gives us a whole nother realm of code amendments that we can make to support those goals and policies. So even if it's still a valuable comment for this project, but it's also a valuable comment in terms of the regional plan. And whether we get to the fixing the code here, we'll get to fixing the code there.
Right. What about busing? Are we still looking at Mountain Line going to Kachina Village and out to Donny Park? We've been talking about that for years too.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. Transit service outside of city limits is definitely desired. We hear about this all of the time. We're definitely in conversations with county supervisors about this. Using the transit tax, so we have the dedicated transit sales tax that is decided by city voters. So it's really dedicated to within city limits to utilize those funds for service. But agreed, transit outside of the city is desired. We are in communications with that. We don't have funding identified for that service, but please talk with your county supervisor if that is a priority for you. Thank you.
So we're on the question about where, sorry, I'm a little confused. We're on the question about where we should increase density right now.
Correct.
Okay.
I jumped off, but on the busing. But my first
so I think I think the report, this specific language is maybe could be different for me. So it identifies areas where people tend to drive less, but does that exclude areas where they could drive less? So I think that you could expand the areas where people tend to drive less, or are you only looking at currently what exists where people tend to drive less?
It's a great question. And as part of this study, we tried to, the consultant tried to map areas that were sort of identified as low VMT. The map was not great. We didn't feel like it was a really true reflection of what we were seeing in the community. And I think it garnered a lot of conversation in our project management team about this specifically. And it's it's really the latter. It's not even where people tend to, but where they potentially could drive less, and the how to support that. We often are faced with sort of the chicken and the egg situation where transit won't serve vacant property, but vacant property needs to develop and likely doesn't yet have transit. And so how do we overcome and solve that? And we believe that one of the ways to overcome and solve that is to set our density limitations at a place that no matter what will support transit, and so that we can continue to grow our transit network in the future. Did I say that right, Busy? Awesome. Perfect.
Cool.
Thank you, Commissioner Stone. And Commissioner Kuhn for your comments. I, as somebody also who lives over in the Foxland area, echo Commissioner Kuhn's disappointment in not being able to easily walk anywhere and get anything. I was excited when the Maverick went in actually on Butler, although I can't say I bought anything there recently. So my one question that I think kind of addresses that is, how does like residential over commercial buildings, like how does that work in? Because it seems like that's an opportunity to encourage some of that combination.
Sure. So, when our current zoning code was adopted, we went big into mixed use. Um, and we saw several mixed use buildings. We had heavily incentivized the idea of mixed use, and we got a lot of feedback that maybe they weren't as successful as people had imagined they would be. They definitely had the residential component, not necessarily the commercial component. There's a difference of the type of developer that goes into mixed use. You really need somebody who has that commercial experience to create a viable, valuable mixed use project. Aspen Place is a good example of one that really is, and it was done by a commercial developer. We've had other mixed use projects where the developer was primarily residentially focused, and so the commercial portion of the project was not as successful or took time to become successful. So it's definitely been a learning process. We know that we need to make changes and update our mixed use standards, and that it doesn't, mixed use itself doesn't always need to be in one building. It could be a horizontal type situation, and that may work better in certain settings than others. There's definitely a lot of work for us to do. I think we got a little intimidated by what we got initially, but it's time to come back and look at those standards. And that's why we talk about residential density as a possibility, like the highest density residential being in commercial zones. And a lot of that goes back, and so there have already been state statutes, they don't apply to us, where the state is mandating that residential be allowed in commercial zones outright without requiring conditional use permit or any of those other things. We currently have a lot of those limitations here. That statute doesn't apply to us. But the desirability for putting high density in commercial zones is because commercial zones tend to be already away from other residential property. And so you run into less of that conflict that we often run into when we're handling rezoning cases, and neighborhoods get distressed because a new project is coming in and it's unknown. So there's a lot of movement there, but there's definitely a lot of work we need to do. And the consultant has definitely identified that as a weak spot and a place we need to improve.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I like the idea of increasing density. I think the trade-off of if you increase it for everybody, do you discourage affordable housing? But those things are hard to figure out. Yeah. Any other question or any other comments on question 2? Were you gonna respond?
Yeah.
Reply to my comment? Go.
Well, I mean, just there are ways to calibrate it to still keep our incentives is what mostly we're going to aim at. But the next one is parking.
Thanks. How do you support parking reductions, council members?
No, I like the idea the councilman said about, my daughter went to school at a place for a while and they did that. They did it weekly instead of monthly. So she had to rotate weekly in an area for parking and they get pretty good on it. And it did the biking, obviously, university towns is like this. And it slowed down. It does slow down. So, the idea of limiting parking and then street and rotating and I saw that. It's been a few years, but it worked pretty well. So that's a good idea.
So I guess the big question is anybody just dramatically afraid of reducing parking standards? The how and the why, we can figure those details out. We just want to know high level if it's a no-go, a yes-go.
My initial thought in hearing the options and the different scenarios is just thinking about, is there going to be potentially issues created by the change in the development code that are going to be problems after the developer's gone, that's left for the city to solve, and just making sure that whatever that solution is in the reduction of parking, that it's one that we can live with as a community after those folks have left. I'm not sure. I'm trying to think through how that would work with not having parking, particularly in for commercial functions and buildings, and where, because people are going to drive. You think about medical offices and different office spaces and how people are, because people are going to drive.
Mhm.
How those people that are going to drive and not use the public transportation or ride a bicycle or walk, what options are available for them or what decision points they're going to have.
Great points. In my experience, when we leave it, if we were to leave the decision for parking to the market to determine, in my experience, commercial developers usually want to have more parking than we want to allow, especially in terms of medical offices and other facilities. I had the joy of working on the proposed new hospital site and it had so much parking. But where we do see that conflict and that rub tends to be in residential, where a developer wants to do less in order to offset some of that cost. The one thing is even though the developer might leave in a multifamily project, there's always somebody who owns it and operates it who has to deal with the outcome. So even though the developer is gone, there's always somebody who owns that property and manages it that we can deal with to resolve that problem.
I definitely support reducing parking. I think the idea of eliminating parking, my concern is that we are not in a, like the idea of the market will bear and people will make decisions, like we're in a limited resource situation where people buy the house that they can afford and if they can afford it, and like they don't have that option of choosing one with a car if they want it or not choosing one if they choose to use transit. And as great as Mountain Line is, like it doesn't serve a lot of parts of the city and it doesn't operate after 8 o'clock at night or before 6 a.m. And so like um I guess it would be unlikely that a developer would go with zero parking. But I think that's just my main concern, is that like we don't eliminate off-street parking entirely. All right, well, in that case, we can move on to the next one.
Next one is about reduced street widths. How do you feel about reduced street widths? This one I think is going to be hard just because I'm sure your experience throughout the city is lots of different street widths, so it's hard to even know what the standards are today. But our standard for a residential local street is 57 feet in width. Jeff's going to yell out if I'm wrong, but I know I'm right. It's 57 feet. And so, if you want to contemplate where streets are smaller, Presidio, for example, is way smaller streets. But if you look at Timber Sky, that's a newer subdivision. The newest subdivisions since 2016, I believe, are going to have the full newest street width section.
I think the clarification is appreciated because there's a lot of different options to choose from. Just my initial thoughts are the reduced street width plus the on-street parking in the wintertime, what the cumulative effect of that would be. And then considering trash pickup in the residential areas, and then obviously the snow plowing, how all those will interact, and then still having enough space for ambulances, fire trucks, emergency response. Just my initial thoughts.
And I have a question on that. Will that be sidewalks required on both sides then with narrow?
I mean, the conversation is open. I mean, if really, the goal is to get rid of, but I don't think anybody's comfortable with getting rid of sidewalks, if I'm being honest. But it could be part of the conversation if you wanted it to.
No, we need them. We'd have to look at that in the width and at least one side and preferably both sides if you're going to narrowness.
I mean, the only thing I could ever say, and I'm just trying to be transparent and honest, but the places that I've seen where one side of the street works in terms of sidewalks are those where the street is very reduced. There's not on-street parking. They tend to be much smaller developments, like small townhomes developments. And you're not getting big speeds of traffic, and you don't have lots of overall traffic as a whole. So I think there's lots of things that could go into the conversation about street widths. But it does, the idea that you're probably not going to zoom through most neighborhoods if we start reducing street widths is a big conversation, which people are still concerned with.
Thank you.
Yeah, I support narrower street widths. John brings up a lot of good points about what to be careful of, but I think overall we could go down a lot further from where we are now and still meet those other requirements.
And I feel like you guys have already kind of touched on this one because those two kind of go hand in hand.
Winter ordinance, have we moved on to that?
Yeah, sorry, I have a
Oh, sorry.
question 5, I think, and I was like, wait, we missed the menu option, but that's okay. That was the menu for sustainability. But Yeah, so now the question is winter parking ordinance.
I would. I have lived in a lot of cities, a lot of different cities that do not have any winter parking restrictions. And I think it's never really been a problem. So even if it would be a difficulty to message to the public why it was changing that way, I think it should be taken into consideration. I do think it's easier places that I've lived where they have like a only park on the odd side of the street during a snow event. That does make it more comfortable and more easy to deal with. But I would definitely be in favor of replacing the current winter rules.
I'm not a fan of how loosely enforced the current parking ordinance is. It seems like every year cars get snowed in still and plowed in. And so I would definitely support an alternative option that allowed parking throughout the winter, especially in times when, unfortunately, most of our winters are not snowy right now.
I'm sorry, I must have skipped one, didn't I? Yeah, there it is.
It's okay, it just confused me.
Me too.
I would say increasing the transportation demand management strategies and adding them certainly seems like it'd be helpful. The more of those we can get into the code as requirements, not options, is also helpful.
And I'll add to a little of that. You hit it on the point. You got to get transportation. You got to get it closer, and then you can do some of this. But the availability has to be there.
So I had a question, and I am not so involved in the city that I understand how all these things work. So we have traffic impact analysis statements required for certain developments. And certain developments seem like they are required then to put money towards transportation projects. But then I also heard that we don't have transportation fees. Is that the transportation fees aren't required for projects that don't require a code change?
I might get to take this one. Uh, So we require TIAs for a certain level of development. It's typically 100 trips in the peak hour, which is a pretty big development. Everything under that doesn't get any kind of TIA. With a transportation impact fee, typically you'd capture all those smaller projects. I mean, there could be limits where we don't capture really small projects, but anyways, that's one way that impact fees would be helpful. And then yeah, so the larger TIAs basically look through their impacts to the network. Sometimes it's a missing sidewalk link, sometimes it's, a missing turn lane, signal, whatever. And then they're required through the development process to mitigate those things. So they usually fix them, sometimes they cash out. Does that kind of explain the TIA process?
Yeah, thanks. That helps to explain the TIA versus transportation fees.
And what this is talking about is just providing even more codified menu options where legal. So
Speaking of TIAs, those seem like they take time and cost a lot of money. And I don't know, did you guys address how altering those would impact the ability of developers to develop properties?
So some of the common thinking that is that if there's an impact fee, like if coming in the door how much you're going to have to pay, that impact analysis process might not be as difficult. If you don't know how much you're going to pay and it's all dependent on how well you can do the TIA game, that can take a little bit longer. So potentially this could speed things up. That's one of the thinking, one of the thoughts on this process. Okay.
Okay, so I think I'm hearing, I don't see it written down, but what I heard Jeff say was that you would like to move to a fee process instead of the impact analysis process.
It was one of the barriers we identified. Haven't, in terms of where we're going code wise, we didn't pick it up. And here's the reason why, is our development fees have to be reviewed every 5 years. We are almost hitting that cycle. I believe there's going to be a broader discussion on those development fees. So currently, right now, the city only charges development fees for fire and police. So I believe that there'll be a larger discussion as we go through that process, and we have done this before. So everybody can see what that cost looks like in terms of that impact now, or what an impact fee could look like for transportation. That's why we just didn't focus on it so much here.
I can give you just a really quick summary of how those impact fees are created. So basically for transportation, you look at the whole city, this is generalized, but you look at the whole city and figure out where all your needs are, turn that all into dollars and then divide it by all of the units you expect to come online in a certain time period. In the past, the number's been pretty big, and I don't think the concept of it has been a bad concept generally, but people are like, whoa, that's a huge number.
So when we first looked at it in 2000, I think it was 2000 the first time they looked at it, about then. I mean, overall, the total fee was, I think it was in the $15,000 range per house, but we looked at the full range of development impact fees. And that was a little much for people to absorb at that point in time. So yeah, I would only expect that number to come back higher today.
I'll just add high level. I think that menu of sustainability options is a great avenue to go so that people can tailor the sustainability that best fits whatever development's going in. So I think it's a good idea.
Any other closing thoughts or comments? Doesn't sound like it. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Since you're not seeing the chat, we did skip approval of minutes. Don't do it now, but maybe the end of the meeting, we can come back to that one. Next up, we have, I'll let you load while I talk. That'll be more efficient. Dave Nixon's here from our capital improvement program, and he wants to talk to you about Country Club and Oakmont intersection, a project a long time in the making. Not with no, not because of your
Before my time, yeah, thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, Commission. Again, Dave Nixon, City of Flagstaff Capital Improvements Project Manager. And I'm here to, as Jeff indicated, I believe is providing an update. I think Trevor Henry, or I'm sure Trevor Henry touched on this in his 22 slides in April. So we've moved the project along, and I just want to share those results. So it's a no action, just an update. So you guys have already been made aware of the Old Walnut Canyon Country Club in Oakmont, the intersection, safety concerns, the grade rise, the alignment takes a kind of a big turn. So anyway, this project was identified for safety reasons back in the day. And what you guys were presented last, I believe Trevor shared with you the three options that we had coordinated or had our design group WSP coordinate, and that was one was to maintain the movements that are there and do some grading and street work to eliminate that large hump. The other was a mini roundabout as an option. And third was four-way stop control. At the end of the day, we landed in the mini roundabout or compact roundabout. The four-way stop was just a little much for what our data was telling us. So this is, again, just 15% level. This is what WSP designed for what this potentially could look at as a mini roundabout. And again, just at 15%. So we've got the realignment of the grading, we've got ADA, we've got crosswalks, all the things that we asked them to obviously put into this design. So 15% mini roundabout. And just to give you some context, we have one mini roundabout, I think, in town. It's 68 feet across, and that's over at Arrowhead and West. And then we have a couple compact roundabouts in town at Gemini and Pine Cliff, which is 130, and one at Beulah and JWP, which is just a little larger at 143 lineal feet. So even though we're calling it a mini roundabout for the initial exercise, I think the idea is that we're not set in stone with that there could be something happening in between a compact and a mini roundabout. And as far as active transportation improvements, part of this project, we want to provide the connectivity for future Foots Trail. Right now it goes to FAC and stops, so we want to bring that into our new intersection as part of the, the Foots Trail isn't part of the project, but we would stub out at the corners and thinking ahead for the things that are happening there, and also in section 20. And section 20 is this area here in tan. Of course, you can't see my finger, but I think it's the section in the south east corner here that's yet to be developed. So we're just kind of taking that future of section 20 and thinking about that as we weigh in on how we design the roundabout for the future. So just a little more context. So, but yeah, again, just an update on where we're at with Country Club and Oakmont. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to entertain them.
Any questions? Comments? Not hearing any? Thank you so much.
Perfect. Good.
I have a question, sorry. I just wanted to know what the differences in capacity are depending on the size of the roundabout.
I'm so sorry, I missed the middle part of the size of the roundabout and how it affects
the capacity, like for an hour or whatever period of time.
I'll let Jeff jump in on that.
Sure. So as Dave was mentioning, we're taking, the current volumes at this intersection are not terribly high, not even enough to meet the always stop warrant for the intersection. So we took a look at that section 20, which is slated for quite a bit of residential development, which leads into this intersection probably from two legs, but mostly from the Old Walnut Canyon leg. And even with that 2045 horizon year, section 20 building out, we were still looking pretty good for roundabout capacity and level of service there. So once we're at very preliminary design, and so now we're kind of just looking at tables, like roundabouts can carry roughly this many trips, and the trips we're anticipating, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but trips we're anticipating are roughly, matching up with these roundabout tables. But roundabouts, based on how you design them, larger tend to have more capacity. Obviously, if you add a right turn lane, that adds quite a bit of capacity. So we haven't gotten that far yet. The picture we were showing is really conceptual, but we'll fine tune as we move into, I'll say, real design. 15% design is really just a concept layout. Hey, is this the right concept? Does it fit within the right of way and the topography of the area? So we're very preliminary, but we do have our eye on that question. if you're interested in roundabout capacities, I could email that out to the group. There are some fun tables that kind of give you just rough capacities, but we're in good shape here long-term with the concepts we've got so far. Wasn't a direct number
Thank
answer,
you.
which I like to give, but I think it gets you there.
Jeff, I like this idea because being on, again, over the years and the complaints on the speed there too, it'll help with some of the speed we've dealt with over the years.
Yeah, it's very, for those who've been through, it's very awkward. There's a real sight distance issue to the south. This project cleans that up. We've had a few crashes, none severe, but we've had a few crashes, and it's definitely a challenge to get across this intersection as a ped or bike because you just can't see far enough. Cars can't see far enough. It's even harder for peds and bikes. So this is pretty cool. And then as Commissioner Kuhn mentions, yeah, this is a great transition point where we're going from kind of an arterial road into the neighborhood. Roundabouts are used sometimes just for that function to try to change the character of the driving experience. So it seems to be aligning and checking a lot of boxes. So we're excited to keep moving with this thing over the next 12 months or so, get this design rolling.
Yeah, I will say I do like roundabouts that are one lane. And so when I hear you talk about adding like a right turn slip lane, that's where I'm like, ooh, that tends to get a lot more dangerous for bikes and pedestrians. But as it's drawn, it looks like it could be good.
Yeah, we're not anticipating that here, but I just mentioned it in general. I don't think we're going to end up at that level here.
I was just gonna share, my initial thoughts, same as Bob and what Jeff mentioned as well. I think it's a good idea, and it's an awkward, I think you said it exactly how I was thinking, awkward intersections. I think that this should help it out quite a bit.
Good deal. Well, thank you for the feedback and thanks for having me.
Yeah, and if we're able to develop Section 20 with good commercial and mixed use, then we shouldn't increase too much traffic because people can stay within the same space, right?
We can do some, but more is always more. Even the great environment tends to spin off some trips.
Okay, I think Dave Lemke is up next.
Hello, Transportation Commission. My name is David Lemke. I'm just going to get my laptop set up and pull this up, and then I'll start the presentation.
As he's going, you'll remember we had a good discussion in April. I think we might have had a discussion in February as well. We're kind of slowly narrowing down the issues on the regional or the residential traffic management program. So we took your feedback from April, which was fairly finite. There's just a couple of questions. Dave's met with our attorney's office. He's ready to roll. Hopefully he's got final answers for you tonight.
Yes, that's the hope. So yes, tonight, just like Jeff said, we're going to be going over the Residential Traffic Management Guide update. And the purpose is to refine the qualifying thresholds for projects that get into the program and clarify the neighborhood approval requirements. These are all things that we've seen in the past. And the big thing that we are trying to address today is the neighborhood approval, and specifically how it relates to residents versus property owners. But just for more context, the new thresholds are simplified. They're based on past studies. They focus on areas with the greatest need. And we break them into categories for speeding issues, volume, pedestrian crossings, and bicycle facilities. And so still talking about the thresholds, but we're changing it for speeding concerns. For the percentage of vehicles traveling more than 5 miles per hour above the speed limit must be greater than 30%. And we'll only consider residential, commercial, local, and minor collector roadways. The existing thresholds before were very multifaceted and were hard to discern measurable change in a digestible form after improvements were installed. And so thanks for bearing with me. Now we're getting to the neighborhood approval portion. So we do still want to have a boundary area determined early by staff, and neighborhood approval is needed to initiate a traffic study like from that area. They would have to get approval from either property owners or residents at that point to get the traffic study going. But then to install the traffic calming, we would still want to keep it limited to property owners, and we'd need property owners 100% right next to or adjacent to the infrastructure improvement, and 65% of property owners overall in the boundary area. Talking to our legal department, they encouraged us to limit it to property owners because it'll have such an impact on the property. Their thoughts were that if the tenants were dissatisfied with the traffic calming, they could ultimately decide to move, but the property owners are in a way burdened with the infrastructure and have to deal with it if it takes away parking spaces or this or that. But they did acknowledge that it is hard to get property owners to respond all the time, especially with these sorts of approval requirements and thresholds. So they encouraged me to add this to the program that if property owners are unresponsive after receiving a certified mail postcard and being contacted by phone after a period of 2 months, the approval will be determined by the responsive property owners. So in our pool, if we ask all these different property owners to respond and we only get like a handful or like a certain percentage, that will be the percentage that decides. And if they're all like yes, then we'll go through and it'll apply the same rules, like the 100% right next to it and the 65% that are overall. And then this is just things you've seen before, a boundary example of how we would choose the boundaries. It's very case specific based on the neighborhood. All neighborhoods are different, especially in Flagstaff, and which neighbors would be most directly impacted. And that gets us to our recommendation. And we do recommend moving forward with the proposed updates for the refined, simplified, measurable thresholds and the clarified neighborhood approval requirements. And with that, I'll turn it over to the commission for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Lemke. Are there any comments by the commission members?
David, my understanding then, if you mailed it to 40 and only 5 responded, those 5 didn't get it. There was the attorneys didn't say, they didn't put a minimum number on how many have to respond before you can do that, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yes. Thanks. Okay.
I have a quick question, clarification. So 65%, so what is it here? The neighborhood approval is needed to initiate the study. 65% of either tenants or property owners in the boundary area must agree there is a need. So that's 65% of the total properties. So it's one vote from either of those would count 65% being the total in that boundary area.
Correct. Yes. Like we wanted to put that in because we get so many requests for traffic calming. If we fulfilled all of them, we'd be constantly out putting our tubes down. And it's good to get neighborhood buy-in early. So if there's a general consensus in the neighborhood that yes, like there's speeding issues or there's volume issues here, it helps prepare things for more of the process because they're already aware, like, okay, we're doing a study. And then when we go for neighborhood approval, like they're aware that the project's happening and it just makes the process go a lot smoother.
I clarified this. So in a neighborhood with single family homes, one property, one vote.
Yeah.
And then not to go down a rabbit hole, but what about in like a commercial property where you might have, we have multiple tenants?
Typically, we've outlined it in the guide that if when it comes to voting, it would just be the property owner for that development. But for the early stages, I think we would still accept approval from any of the residents. We haven't ran into that yet. Usually those developments are on higher level streets than the ones that we typically see for this program, like the locals and the minor collectors. So we haven't ran into it yet, but if we did, we would be flexible with like, that's typically how it always is. Like whatever the situation is, we draw the boundary and be reasonable. It's like, okay, these are the people who will be impacted. They're the ones we need the approval from. So we'll typically take it by case if it comes to that.
Sounds good. I like the updates that my input. I'm in favor.
Yeah, I appreciate you making the modifications and digging into that detail a little more. I support this as it's written.
Great.
This is a fun one. You get to vote on this one. So this is a full.
It sounds like we have
full action
a
item.
motion to accept the additions and the changes that were made to this.
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Phew, squeaker there.
All right. Thank you all.
I'll take this moment real quick to go over the agenda item I missed. Earlier on, we had approval of minutes. I'll leave it to the commission for anybody who might want to help out with that.
I move to approve.
I'll second that. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Minutes are approved.
Thank you. They were there. We might as well. All right, we're getting near the end.
So we have the reports from the BAC and PAC. I believe we have members of each of those in attendance. Do you guys have anything you'd like to communicate?
This is Sam again. I don't believe so, but if there's something that's unclear that I could comment on, I'd be happy to do so for the Bicycle Advisory Committee.
Great. Thank you both for attending the meeting. We're on the informal section now. Do you have anything specific?
I was going to make some comments on 2 through 7 when you're ready for me.
Any commissioner discussion? Go for it, Jeff.
All right. Quiet zones. Most of the improvements, if you haven't noticed, are in place. The signs are up. The sidewalk stencils are up. Second train warning signs. C-tracks, think train. All that stuff is up. We're still looking at doing a little bit more fencing, especially on the east side of town. I'm not sure. So that's still ongoing. We continue to meet with the Federal Road Administration. Each time we have an incident on the tracks, and we had 3 over the first week and a half of May. But so far we're keeping our quiet zones for now. But the incidents were, we had a disabled vehicle on the tracks that was hit. We had a car that parked northbound at Ponderosa Parkway that was the 4th car, didn't fit and was hit. We had a vehicle turn onto the tracks instead of turn onto the road. They were following Google Maps too closely. Luckily, we were able to stop all the trains and get them. They were hung up high centered on the tracks, able to get them off before the trains. And then we had a gentleman jump on a slow moving train, and then it got moving fast and he jumped off. And it wasn't as good as jumping on, but I mean, injuries, but not super severe. So yeah, we had at least 4 in May, which is a lot, but fortunately no injuries except for the gentleman who jumped on the train and jumped back off. So we continue to monitor that. Cedar 4th, I wrote that weird. 4-Cedar Locket roundabout project. If you haven't been through that intersection, it is closed now and will be until probably midnight the day before school starts. They're making some progress, decent progress. They're switching to 7-day-a-week, 10-hour shifts to make sure they can get that thing done. So No hiccups at this point. By the time we get to our August meeting, it should be like right about ribbon cutting. So pretty cool project to keep an eye on. We also have Cedar Avenue closed a little bit to the west of that for the Spruce Wash box culverts. So we took advantage and that whole area is closed right now. Butler Avenue Complete Streets, that's the separated bikeways. That's about to get advertised for a design engineer consultant selection process. So that's good news. That is making progress. Schweitzer, I wrote Mesa, Schweitzer Canyon Trail, which is that Foots Trail that starts on Schweitzer Canyon, kind of near the roundabout. There's a little piece there, but it connects to the end of there and wraps all the way around into downtown. We opened bids last week and our lowest responsive bidder was slightly under budget estimate. So that's a go. Yeah, that's great news. The last time we did that, that was not the case. And that's why it got spun back a year. Asphalt foots repairs, I think we've talked about that a little bit. That's repairing basically every asphalt foots in Flagstaff this summer. That's Dave's project. He did a kickoff meeting yesterday with the contractor. So is it like next week we'll see some action as quick as that, or maybe the week after? It's very soon. So that'll be really cool. He's going to work on the 180 foots first to try to get that done because that's in proximity of all the schools, making sure we get that done before school gets started. So some concrete ramps, but mostly it's asphalt foots repair. And if you've been on a couple of those sections, they're in horrible shape. So this is going to be a really, really big improvement.
What's our confidence in this improvement being long-term?
We've got a really good project manager. No, they're going to do full rebuilds. So all the asphalt's, being pulverized, recompacted, new lifts of asphalt, a slightly different mix than we've used in the past. So that's the first improvement. We're recognizing that these trails need maintenance. I mean, I don't know the history of all of them, but I remember when the Lone Tree foots went in by the community college almost about 20 years ago. It's never been touched. So, I mean, it's in bad shape. The cracks are horrible, but kind of the field in between the cracks actually isn't that bad. So if we can do a better job every handful of years with cracks, some fog coats, refreshing the oil on top, we should be able to get a lot longer life out of them and a much smoother ride for a long time. So we have good confidence. I think asphalt is a pretty decent, runners prefer it on trails over concrete. So I think it'll be pretty good. But we're recognizing the maintenance component that we just had neglected. So I think we'll be in pretty good shape. And then road repair and street safety, you just see that all over town, all the little chip seals and fog seals and different things. Next week, kind of exciting, they're doing a big fog seal, which we haven't traditionally done in the Crestview and Presidio neighborhoods. And the Crestview will be something I don't think we've ever done before, but Tuesday, for half a day, they're going to close every street in the neighborhood. We're not sure how this is going to work out, but that's the plan. So there's your heads up if you live in Crestview. That's my informational items for tonight. I can answer any questions about other projects if you've seen things out there you have questions, but those are the ones I thought I'd highlight for you this summer.
Can you give us an update on the university roundabout, when that's going to open, or the underpass going to open?
The underpass has stayed open. It's actually open right now. You can walk through it. It was open for a short time, so it's kind of like a soft opening. I think we'll have an official grand opening. It's either late June or in July. I'll email everyone so they know when it officially opens, but it's getting pretty close.
But I can use it right now.
You can walk through it right now.
Can I
You haven't
bike
been in?
through it?
You can bike through it. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. And the roundabout's been open, but yeah, that little section of university hasn't been open, but we'll be here in the next month or two.
Excellent. Well, I'm not hearing any specific comments further. So it looks like our next meeting is August 6th with a tentative agenda of the streets master plan update. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.